And now I'm pleased to welcome and introduce Dr. Paul Brent, who is currently a consultant and has been broadly involved in national and international committee on risk assessment. And we will speak about risk assessment training. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, I'd like to thank the EFSA for inviting me here to present at this very timely and exciting meeting. And there's no doubt that EFSA has established itself as a major force in the food safety area in the world today. I must say that after listening to Graney, I feel like a rank amateur to talk about something educational. Oops, did I go the wrong way? There you go, I'm a rank amateur. We're back. Today I'm going to speak about food chemical risk assessment training, and this is an important area, I think you'll all agree. I'll particularly describe a project that myself and my colleagues, Dr. Manfred Lützow, who's in the audience here, and Professor Leon Breimer have been working on for almost 2 years now. It's been sponsored by the World Bank Global Food Safety Partnership, and it's to develop an e-learning module on food chemical risk assessment, which is focused mainly on training for developing country food regulators. And I wanted to acknowledge up front the support of the World Bank Global Food Safety Partnership to facilitate the project, which is now at near conclusion. But firstly, I just wanted to put some things into context, briefly describing past, present and future challenges for food safety and food chemical risk assessment. And I'll go through these very fast because most of these issues were raised yesterday in the plenaries. So just to remind you that things in food safety in the local food supply quickly become global issues. So something that happens in Australia may affect the whole world. And the extension of that is to say that anything that happens anywhere in the world these days will affect other countries in the world. And of course, we heard many times yesterday that by 2050 we'll have 9 billion people to feed. And most of the new population will be centred in poorer parts of the world. And we also know that we're living for longer. For example, in Japan alone, there are 3 million centenarians. So we're living longer, and that means that our populations are becoming more vulnerable. We know that the structure of the global food industry is continually changing and evolving, so we've got mergers and acquisitions, foreign market expansion, strategic partnerships, both bilateral and multilateral. And only last week we had in the news the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a big partnership in the Pacific area, which is being sponsored and supported by countries like Australia and the US and so on. And the volume and types of food being traded globally is increasing. Food is moving faster to more people, longer destinations, and across different food regulatory standards, and also across different standards of food safety. And that means that there's more opportunity for things to go wrong. And this slide just demonstrates some of the different drivers for change in the global economy and the food supply. So increasing reliance on imports, new scientific knowledge, changing eating patterns and demographics, etc. And again, these were major themes that we heard about yesterday. Now, food risks are also changing. So classic food risk factors such as heavy metals present in food are still a problem, but also now we have new technologies, we heard about these yesterday, that challenge us as scientists and regulators. Traditionally, food safety concerns were, of course, microbiological, chemical, but today we have a much bigger array of bacteria and viruses. So recently in Australia we had outbreaks of hepatitis A, which have been foodborne, and of course concerns with chemicals we weren't aware of, such as melamine from adulterations, acrylamide, BPA we heard about yesterday, and nanoscale materials, and so on. And this is a really important issue. So as detection methods become more precise, allowing detections at parts per billion and parts per trillion and parts per quadrillion, we have the problem about management of zero tolerance. These are usually requirements where very, very low levels of chemicals in food are safe, but non-compliant with zero tolerance legislations. Now, regarding food chemical safety, I've already said local issues quickly become national and international, and so governments have to respond very quickly. And there are a number of challenges to responding, which are listed here on the slide. For example, perception of consumers versus scientific evidence, legal issues, politics, and cultural values. So in the context of the global food supply and the increased risks of chemicals, let me now just describe to you the project sponsored by the World Bank Global Food Safety Partnership on developing this e-learning module on food chemical risk assessment. Regarding food chemical training, risk assessment training, you'll be aware that there are many sources of such trainings. But it's fair to say that they are usually targeted to specific audiences and not always complete. In my experience also, it's shown me that there seems to be a never-ending demand for food chemical risk assessment training, particularly in the developing world. And so we set out to develop a product that would use a simple approach with lots of examples, and that it might appeal to a general audience, especially developing country regulators. Okay, so we had to have a team, and with any team you have to have some leaders. So here's a cartoon of the distinguished dinosaurs who are developing recommendations for the design of the memo. So this is our team. The main contributors to the module development were Manfred Lützow and Professor Leon Breimer from the University of Copenhagen and myself. So that was with respect to preparing material and writing, etc. Sonia Bradley provided coordination and support between ourselves and the World Bank Global Food Safety Partnership. We formed an expert group, and it comprised those people listed on the slide, some of whom you would well know, like Angelica Tritcher, Jin Lim, and so on. So these people provided suggestions and comments throughout the module development, and I'd like to sincerely acknowledge their time and efforts. Note that the EG comprises colleagues from WHO JECFA, from US FDA, from EFSA, New Zealand Ministry of Primary Industry, GIFSAN, United States Department of Economics, and so on. Now, as I've already said, the audience is mainly to be used, the product will be used as a tool to be used, focusing on developing country regulators, but the module may also be used to assist a broader audience, including the food industry. So this slide just demonstrates the broad time frames that we work to from conceptualization of the project in 2013, forming the expert group, consultation with potential providers of materials, and subsequent review of that material. We did present our findings, our preliminary findings to the World Bank meeting in Cape Town in 2014. And at the present time, we're ready to present the draft module to the expert group and hopefully prepare to road test the module soon, but I'll get onto that later. When we presented our preliminary findings to the World Bank in Cape Town in 2014, we reported that there was an abundance of material and we ranked 4 of these sources as suitable in part. But we found no single source as complete or suitable for e-learning. We did identify a text which was written by Professor Leon Breimer, University of Copenhagen, as a suitable source that seemed to fit our requirements. On approach, we found the University of Copenhagen and Professor Breimer as willing to help us. So basically he gave us permission to plagiarise his book, to use it as the basis for the e-learning module. So it was a good example of sharing. During our original searches, we found most of the available material was adopted to train specific audiences. And in developing our module, we followed some general principles. We wanted to take advantage of pre-existing materials, so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel if we could. We would seek providers of materials agreements to use them, invite them to join the group. There was basically no remuneration to providers of materials. We just didn't have the funding. And we used a tiered approach for developing the module, starting with general high-level principles and then drilling down to more complex information. We decided to take an approach that used as many practical examples in the teaching module rather than beginning with traditional dogma on food chemical risk assessment. So we took a slightly different approach. We proposed 7 chapters for the module, mainly utilising the Breimer textbook as our model. The 7 chapters are listed here on the slide. So a general introduction chapter, toxicity of food chemicals, regulatory frameworks, how much, so dietary exposure modelling, formalising the process, and then specific aspects of amending the principles to cover GMOs and novel foods and nanoscale chemicals that go into foods and so on. And then in chapter 7, trying to tie it all together and applying the information. As I said, we tried to give as many practical and contemporary examples as possible, including some of these that are listed on the slide. So we tried to make the module a very practical tool for particularly the developing country regulators to have contemporary examples of things that are actually happening right now, like BPA and lead is an old one, acrylamide, mycotoxins, GM food safety, novel food safety, nanomaterials, new plant breeding technologies. So these are a new challenge to regulators, where people are using new breeding techniques to produce foods that actually do perhaps have some challenges, particularly in terms of even understanding how they did it, flavouring agents, food additives, and so on. So I'll just go through the 7 chapters very briefly. The first one is what is the problem? So understanding what food chemicals are, way back to the table of elements we go to, which is in the Breimer book. Why are they present in food? Why are some of them unsafe? What basic questions are to be answered when assessing their safety? And then developing the concept of risk assessment, risk analysis, using examples rather than using too many scholarly traditional approaches. For Chapter 2, which it addresses typical scientific concepts of toxicity of the chemicals, such as absorption, distribution, metabolism and excretion, obviously, and dose response, benchmark dose, and we introduce all of the contemporary concepts in that chapter. So this is a very meaty chapter and is quite technical. And then in Chapter 3, we describe general aspects of the regulatory framework, concepts like ADIs, interactions between risk assessors and risk managers in a general way. Chapter 4, it's a very important chapter. We look at dietary exposure assessment. We stress all the way through the module that every chemical has an intrinsic hazard, and we saw a lot of this yesterday, particularly in Sir Mark Walport's talk yesterday. But it's the dose that makes the poison. So risk equals hazard times exposure. And we need to take a risk-based approach rather than a hazard-based approach. So this is just the heading of Chapter 4, and I won't go through all of these because it just gives you an idea in Chapter 4 of some of the elements that we address. Chapter 5, we address the risk analysis framework and introduce international bodies and agencies that have important roles in food safety risk assessment, such as FAO and WHO and the FDA and EFSA and so on. Chapter 6, we look at how the main principles in food chemical risk assessment are modified, as I said, to address other issues such as GMOs, nanomaterials, new plant breeding techniques, and novel foods and so on. And then finally in Chapter 7, we tie everything together to enable application of the information. So in late 2014, the writers began our parallel work on all of the 7 chapters. Leon Breimer at that stage agreed to join our writing group, so he's the expert on pedagogical matters at the University of Copenhagen. He was an expert in e-learning. So here on the slide is a picture of Leon's textbook that he agreed that we could use comprehensively. I don't expect you to see this slide to read it or anything. It's just an example to illustrate the allocation of tasks that we organised between the 3 writers. We tried to allocate time frames for our work to manage the project, and we were quite disciplined about this. In terms of challenges, though, I must say there were quite some challenges, and I think Graney has already illustrated some of the downsides of trying to write such a module across 3 different parts of the world. We worked from Australia, from Switzerland and Denmark and Washington. The expert group came from all parts of the world, and there was the inevitable technology and communication challenges. We worked using emails, telephone, Skype. We held a face-to-face meeting in Wettingen in Switzerland at Manfred's offices. I must say that was really worthwhile because we sat in a round table facing each other with our computers, and we as we composed text, we talked with each other and exchanged views and so on. So that was very good. But for the most part, we were using the normal technologies. And finally, there's already been a lot of pressure for us to finish because there's already interest to use the module. In terms of the next steps, So almost the last slide. We've recently formatted and edited the module. We're seeking comments from the expert group, and a copy will be available to the expert group on the Massey University website in New Zealand. So they've got a site which is secure that people can use and make comments. And we've got interest already to road test the module in the ILSI Southeast Asia region and ASEAN region. And then we'll get feedback from the road test once it's done. We'll amend the module after the feedback, and then it'll be published on the World Bank Global Food Safety website in several different languages, we hope, and then we hope people will use it. So it'll be free to be used, and I think also free to be modified. Now, my last slide. So one of these little guys is my grandson, but we have to, our task in food safety is to make sure that everything they eat is safe, and now it's for 90 years because we're all living longer. So thank you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul Brent. We'll have some time for a few questions. Maybe just the first one. Would you have a focus on new concern, emerging concern like endocrine disruption, exposure to multi-pollutants, and so on?
Yes, we have addressed many, just as many of the contemporary issues that we can. So we've addressed as many issues as we can, but we've designed the module so that we give an introduction to the topic, and then we provide lots of links for the student to go and learn more about it themselves. So we don't go into too much detail. It's a fairly general start.
First question on the left, yes.
Thank you. Corrado Gallis from the University of Milano. I think that it's worth to remind to the audience that since few months we have a European standard for training of risk assessors. Because we started a project a few years ago with Eurotox and DG Sanco and the CEN, which is the European Standardization Office. And then 3 months ago has been accepted the content, the text that we have now a European standard for risk assessor training. That is the CEN TC 416. And mostly what you said is present in the standard, because of course we didn't invent the wheel, as you said, so just putting together some of the concepts. And I believe that if you are interested, there is a poster outside 57 where is described all the activity and what is the request. If one academy or whatever private institution wants to organize a risk assessment training in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Aideen McCavitt from University College Dublin in Ireland, and what I was going to ask you is, how do you propose to assess that the students who take your module have achieved the learning outcomes of your module? So it's your assessment strategy.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. That's a very good question. So it's still early days. We want to road test the implementability of the module with a few ASEAN countries first. Then we'll get their feedback and possibly amend the module based on their feedback. Within the World Bank Global Food Safety Partnership, there is a whole unit which is specialising in how to assess the utility of anything that we produce. And so we intend to put the module into their hands and get them to work to help us assess the success and whether or not the students have learnt anything from the module. So we have been thinking about that, but it's still early days.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have a last question on the left.
Okay, good morning. I'm Lisbeth Jacksons from Ghent University in Belgium. We're running already an international training for 6 years, and the last 3 years we have indeed a preparatory course with e-learning for 6 weeks. And what we learned from it is that you really need to have some moments of interaction with your students, because surely in these technical parts about dietary exposure, they really need some technical assistance from time to time. So did you introduce this also in your training?
So the way I interpret your question is, do you mean, technical assistance? Yes,
yeah.
it's
feedback moments
feedback.
Or discussion moments.
Yeah, and also perhaps even, as I said, road testing the module face to face. So in those face to face meetings, we would have technical assistance there. So the students could undertake the module training, then come to a meeting where we would take them through the module again to see what they've learned, what they didn't learn, what problems they had, and then take that feedback and then perhaps try to improve the module. But all of this is contingent on further funding and so on. So yes, we've thought about that. And also we would have technical assistance online as well, if it could be arranged. I think my colleague, Dr. Lutzow, also wants to make a comment.
Okay, I will leave this discussion for the final panel discussion due to question of time. I thank you very much, and